So next step is back C. This is the transmission of the car, including the motor mount and the bulkheads. So we're gonna also attach them to the chassis. So let's start with the assembly of back C. We first have the aluminium spur gear holders, and you have one with a small bearing and a big bearing. So make sure you always use the M3x4 for the spur gear. If the screw is longer than that, it won't fit and the screw will hurt the pulley. So now the assembly of the center shaft, very easy, very nice design. One bearing, shim, other side of the pulley, one more bearing, and a M3x5 screw will hold everything, and it's ready to go. Now the assembly of the bearings on the motor mount. It's a very important thing. The bearings will lead the belt in a perfect way around. So these are the bearings on the motor mount. So this one is the ball. Next thing is the assembly from the motor mount and the bulkheads onto the chassis. I'm gonna follow the manual. First race we did, we took out some screw here to get a little bit more motor mount flex, which in general gives you a little bit more steering. Now the bulkheads. And all four bulkheads are the same. They only have to point to the center with this part, because you're gonna mount the top deck on this. Don't tighten the bulkheads yet. Later on I will tighten it with a special tool to align them. So now it's just to put it on the chassis. So to align the bulkheads properly, I have the bulkhead alignment tool here, and I'm gonna use it now. Gonna put the pins . And now I'm gonna tighten the bulkhead. Never over tight. But with this alignment tool set, you make sure the bulkheads are straight mounted on the chassis. Now I will continue to put in the transmission, starting with the front spool. One shim, eccentric with the bearing, and yeah, this build is quite straightforward, so nothing special here. Only check the eccentric. You can adjust the diff to have the diff up or down, and it's the same with the spool, up or down. And this is the eccentric. The long belt goes to the front, the shorter belt in the rear. The default setting is to have the eccentric exactly in the middle. And we'll do the same with the rear diff. Now the middle pulley transmission. Next thing is the bulkhead clamp, and make sure that the diff and the spool are in the middle, right here. So next up is the upper arm mount, and you have one dot and two dots. The one dot needs to be on the left front bulkhead or the right rear bulkhead, and the dot 2 has to be on the left rear and the right front bulkhead. Now I will place the upper arm mount onto the bulkhead clamp, and I will add 2 of 0.4 shims to adjust the camber link length. Put them like this inside and tight the upper arm mount. When that's done, I will mount the shock towers on the car. Welcome to the next episode. Today back D, we're gonna open it. In back D we're gonna assemble the suspension mounts, the servo mount, we're gonna put the flex brace in the rear, and we will assemble the steering rack. Start with the front. We're gonna use the 46mm suspension blocks, and we're gonna add a 0.4 shim under the suspension mount. For the suspension block front rear, I will add this shim under the block so we can adjust the roll center. Assembly the rear. The rear is a 44.5mm block, and again a 0.4mm shim to raise the roll center. And in the rear front we're gonna use separate suspension mounts, and we will add another 0.4mm roll center shim right here. And now the assembly of the steering rack. First put the bearings This is the Ackerman plate. This is a default 8.5mm, and you put it in like this so you can see which one you are using. We have 8mm as an option and 9mm as an option. Then we take the ball, one shim, 1mm Ackerman, and 1mm on the top. Check if everything is free. Steering rack is done. Now I will prepare the turnbuckles, but before I'm gonna do that, I want to make some thread in the plastic part. Now it's a little bit more easy to put it on. So use a turnbuckle tool 4mm. Make sure when you build the steering linkage is around 65mm. Click it and it's done. Now I will attach the steering rack onto the chassis, and first I'm gonna mount the steering post. After that I put the steering rack over it, and now I will tie the steering rack onto the steering post and check if it's free. Next one is the installation of the servo on the servo mount. This is a Sanma servo that I use. Pretty straightforward, super nice shims. So I didn't tie the screws yet. As you can see, it can move a little bit. So the best position for the servo is all the way down and in. I do that so the center of gravity is low as possible. Now I will install the servo horn, and with the kit there comes a plastic one, but I will recommend you to use the aluminium option one, and for Sanwa you need number 23. Servo is done. Making the servo rod now, and have to cut 4mm of the ball joint. Steering rod is made. It's about 46mm total length, and with a plier I will install it. And now I will place the 2mm graphite chassis stiffener right here. And now I will attach the aluminium top deck post onto the motor mount. This is the antenna mount and also a battery stopper. And a default setting for the battery stopper is about 2mm shim. And I put it right here. The shim used here will affect the position of the battery. The less shim, the more the battery is inside. The more shim, the more the battery will be outside. It depends on the weight balance of the car. Now I will mount the top deck, and there's only one way to place the top deck. you go to the front belt and you have to open again for the rear belt, and it's right there. Now we'll assemble the screw, but I won't tighten it yet. And to finish up the assembly of the top deck, I will mount the aluminium top deck bridge, the stiff version, right now.